My guest today is Andrea Nakayama. She's a functional medicine nutritionist and educator who's helped thousands of people and clients and teaches coaches and clinicians all over the world on how to reclaim ownership of both their own and their clients' health. And Andrea is also the host of the 15-Minute Matrix podcast and the founder of the Functional Nutrition Alliance, where she draws on her experience and her expertise to slow down our rapidly growing chronic illness epidemic. And Andrea has been through hardship, and she lost her husband to a brain tumor in 2002. But through this tragedy, she found out that she had a passion for using food as personalized medicine and is now regularly consulted as the nutrition expert for some of the toughest clinical cases in the practices of so many doctors out there. And she trains nearly 4,000 practitioners every year in her methodologies so that they too can become the last stop for their clients and patients, as well as a trusted referral partner for doctors in their area. And today we're going to talk about nutrition, of course, and autoimmune disease and some of the problems that women face in menopause, as well as what we can do to resolve them. So now, without further ado, let's meet Andrea Nakayama. Welcome.
Thank you, Zora. I'm so excited to be here with you and talk about these important topics.
So I'm first of all, I'm really sorry to hear about your husband. I know it's been a while, but how has his death really formed your interest in the career that you have today?
Yeah, such an important question, and thank you. It's over 20 years, but I would say it is at the roots of everything I do today because it was my first experience entering the medical system, recognizing that when somebody has a chronic illness, they're all of a sudden in or part of a system that sees a part of the individual, but not the whole individual. So that was my first wake up to recognizing that there were gaps in our very brilliant medical system. So I'm not here to vilify the medical system. I'm here to say the doctors can't do it at all, and there needs to be more. And that really woke me up to those gaps, to those opportunities. And we did a lot during his life to support his care, but it also then informed what I would do going forward in my new career after that. It wasn't a career I had. I didn't work in this field when he was alive. It was all built after he passed away.
And why in the field of nutrition? Because there's probably so many gaps that you saw. You probably could go through many. And how is it that you chose this one? And did you use any of the what you know now during his life or his final years?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So if I look back, I could certainly say if I only knew then what I know now. So I've learned a lot in relation to looking at labs and understanding what's going on for an individual, but we did do a lot with food as medicine. So my first ponderings around what we could do, because he was given a grave diagnosis. He was given 6 months to live. And at the time of his diagnosis, I was 7 weeks pregnant. So
Wow.
here we were told that he wasn't going to live to see our son born. We didn't know it was a son at that time, but our baby born. And we were thinking about everything and anything we could do. And I was already somebody who loved cooking, who loved food. He loved food. He was very like sensual about his food. And so I started researching what's possible for us to do, not to change the directory of the cancer directly, because he was going through radiation therapy and craniotomy surgery and chemotherapy. But what do we do to offset the impacts of those medical interventions and shift the terrain in which the cancer is growing? So that was my intent, and that really informs the work I do. So it's nutrition, but to me, nutrition is broader than the food we eat. It's about growth, metabolism, and repair, which means that dietary and lifestyle factors are actually food or fuel for for our cells. And again, this concept of shifting the terrain versus dealing with the diagnosis alone are that difference and where I saw we could fill a gap. So as an example, Zora, I started to research how does sugar and glycemic response feed cancer cells? And what could we do to shift that occurrence? So he had a sweet tooth, and when I showed him this research, he said, let's just eliminate sugar. And then I started to experiment with what are ways we could feed the sweet tooth without feeding the glycemic response, the blood sugar response, and how do we use alternative whole food sweeteners to be able to have our delight without doing damage on the body. So that was like a first instinct of, wait a minute, there's a connection here between what we eat, how the body responds, and how that in turn affects this, what I call a branch, this diagnosis. And so that's where I started to see things through a different lens.
It's incredible, probably when you start studying it or you start learning about it and you make those connections. But if you don't know, you never put two and two together, which sounds ridiculous sometimes, but it is true. The body does respond. I always think it's kind of like a car, and we have fuel we got to put into it. And if it's not the good stuff, well, the car's not going to really run very well, right?
Correct.
So you learned a lot about chronic illnesses and women going through this menopause transition. When we lose our hormones, sex hormones, we seem to be more at risk of so many diseases as soon as we pass through that, or as we approach this. And so, why do so many women in midlife with chronic health concerns struggle to identify a diagnosis and then just get the right kind of care?
Yeah, this is big. And, that experience with my late husband, Isamu, really woke me up to the prevalence of chronic illness, right? So when we think about chronic illness, we're typically thinking about what's understood by medicine and science as chronic illness, and that includes cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. Those are considered the chronic illnesses. In fact, autoimmunity, which is very prevalent, actually more prevalent than those three put together, is a chronic health condition that more and more people are experiencing. And it's mostly women. 75% of those that are diagnosed with autoimmunity are female. So we're seeing women of younger ages as well struggling with more, even girls today, struggling with more autoimmune conditions. And we can talk about the underlying reasons why that is. But then this compromises what I would say are the 20% of the population who are not getting better with the standards of care. The biohacking doesn't work, the quick fixes doesn't work, what works for your cousin or your sister or your next door neighbor doesn't work. You're trying all the new diets, the way of looking at things, that supplement, this wearable, and nothing's working. So there's 20% of the population overall that just isn't getting better with those standards of care, whether they're in medicine or in popular media. As we age, I believe that that 20% becomes the 80%, that it flips, that as you said, declining in our production of the sex hormones, we start to experience more symptoms that give rise to all the other symptoms that we may have been harboring in our physiological body that then we're feeling more acutely. So I believe that these populations are underserved, and that they are all females primarily that are going through these injustices of not looking at things through a lens that really can empower us to make a difference.
I'm sure there are women out there who feel just gaslit when they go to the doctor, and it's, oh, in your head, or there's nothing wrong with you, or even your biomarkers are fine, and then we're given some kind of antidepressant or some sleeping pills or something, when in fact it has something to do with perimenopause or menopause. So I think that's like, I agree with you 100% that and it seems as though many doctors are not qualified or have the right tools to treat a woman in menopause or going through this transition at all. So that may have something to do with it, because as I understand that just not getting the training in medical school, it's again like an hour like they do nutrition or something
Right,
ridiculous like
exactly.
that, right?
Yes. Yes. And I think we're looking at it through the wrong lens. So, what I like to invite people to do is shift our thinking from what I'm going to call the branch, and I'm going to give you an analogy so we can reframe our thinking into the roots and the soil. So, when we have signs, symptoms, or diagnoses that are cropping up for us, we go seeking a solution for that. And that's a branch on the tree. So I have a model that I call 3 roots, many branches. So if we just stop for a minute and we think about the signs, symptoms, or diagnoses that we experience or receive through our lifetime, and as we age, I want us to just think of those for a moment as branches. And you and I can list them off, Sora. There's hot flashes and migraines and lack of sleep and belly fat and loss of sex drive. There's also PCOS and estrogen dominance and, painful periods and painful sex. And all of the signs and symptoms, I'm sure you can throw many more in the mix, that I'm going to say those are branches. And before I get to the analogy, I just want to separate what we think of a sign, a symptom, and a diagnosis to empower us all to think about these branches in different ways. So a sign is different than a symptom in that a sign can be quantitatively measured by your medical team. So you can know a sign even if you're unconscious. It's a rash, it's a fever, it can be measured. A symptom is something that you're experiencing that nobody can measure. Your fatigue, your migraines, those can't be measured, but only you can be the one to relay that information and be able to communicate what makes it better, what makes it worse, what's happening there, because they can't measure it. So one tip that I give to women who are going into their medical appointments is to separate the communication of their signs and their symptoms, because the doctor is hearing them all in the same, it's like 2 different languages and they're not able to separate. So talk about your symptoms. Here's something you can measure. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm seeing in my breasts, in my belly, in my rashes, whatever it is. And here are the other symptoms that I'm experiencing. And here's what they're like. Here's when they occur. Here's where I notice they're better and where they're worse. This is where we are the expert in the room. We can't give that expertise away to anybody because it is ours to be able to communicate and measure. So I just want to give that little tip before we go into the analogy of the roots and the branches. Any questions there or thoughts?
Yes. So then, for example, let's just give an example of a woman going into see their doctor in their 50s and saying, I'm experiencing, I have belly fat or I weight gain that I don't know where is coming out of nowhere. And or I have bags in my eyes because I'm
Yeah.
not getting good sleep, right? So
Yeah.
then that would be the sign and say, okay, that's clearly, look at this. You can clearly see it. And then the symptoms would be, for example, then and I don't know, I'm not what would be a symptom of some of those
Fatigue.
2 things, right? I'm
Fatigue. Like, so I have fatigue. I'm experiencing a lot of fatigue. I'm experiencing migraines at certain times of the month. Like, we can't see those. We can't measure those, right? So,
mhm.
but in relation, were you going to say in relation
Yeah,
to
so in
that?
relation to say, yeah, the belly fat or
Mm-hmm.
relation to this to the eye bags, and yes, you're
Mm-hmm.
fatigued because you're not sleeping well. And I'm trying to give people an idea of like what is it that we can measure and what is it that they can in terms of a menopausal woman.
Yes. So our measurement comes through tracking. Our measurement and what we can convey comes through our abilities to tell when, And if we know anything makes a difference. So let's just take belly fat as an example. I'm noticing this belly fat that didn't used to exist. I didn't used to have this belly fat. I recognized that when I started to struggle with it or notice it most was when I turned 49. My period started to change when I was 52. Whatever it is, you're starting to create a timeline that helps that person to help you problem solve. But you're bringing that tracking and that timelining, you're taking the time to do that for yourself because that's the information that you can relay that helps them to help you. So let me give you an example with eye bags. I get eye bags, and this is going to bring us back to our analogy. I get eye bags when I eat certain things. My ability to tune in and know that helps me to not put my eye bags in the hands of an external person, but to make a difference for myself and be able to communicate that. My face gets puffy when I do XYZ. So then I'm in a risk reward conversation with myself instead of handing that over to somebody else to fix for me.
So then the patient or we need to be really dialed in, because so many people I've worked with in the past, I've asked, well, how do you feel when you eat X, Y, or Z? Or I don't know. It's the answer. I don't know.
Exactly.
And then so if you're not dialed in, if you're not used to this, or if you're not journaling, or if you're not taking data, it's probably a new concept for many people. No?
It's definitely a new concept, and I don't think it's the way we think about our care unless we're that 20%. And again, as females, as we age, we become that 20%, but we happen to be 80% of the population. Nobody wants to do this. I always joke about this with functional nutrition. Like, we don't care about functional nutrition until we have to. So this is the area of care where you're saying, oh no, I need to make connections. I need to slow down. I need to pay attention. And that's how we make a difference. So let me just get back to this analogy because there's ways to break this down. So I said that any sign, symptom, or diagnosis is a branch through my 3 roots, many branches methodology. So if we think about a tree in a forest, and it's this magnificent, or not in a forest, in a plain, it's a beautiful plain, and there's only one tree. And we see this tree and it's magnificent. We're drawn to it. We walk towards this tree and we recognize that even though it's the middle of spring, there are some leaves that are turning brown. And there are some branches where the bark doesn't look healthy. And we're really moved to be able to support this tree. We want to support this tree. And so we think, what should I do? Should I get a ladder and pick off all the leaves? Well, that's not going to get me to any resolution. Other leaves are going to turn brown. Should I get a ladder and a saw and start sawing off branches? Well, I could do that, but again, I'm not really helping or nourishing the tree. So let me think about this differently. Where do I go? I can go to the roots. Where further can I go to support those roots? I can go to the soil. So this is what I want us to think about ourselves in this same light. Those signs, symptoms, and diagnoses are all the branches on the tree. We can continue to seek in a sympathetic dominant state, which actually isn't supportive of our hormone resolution, the answers for those things. Is it bioidenticals? Is it this supplement regime? Should I be on keto or intermittent fat? We can keep seeking. But that's like picking off the leaves or sawing off the branches. What I want to invite women to do is come down to the roots. And the 3 roots are always our genes, our digestion, and our inflammation. And when we think about those 3 roots, we can't change them directly, but we can nourish the soil or the environment that that root exists in. So to shift the expression of our genes, we work with an area of science called epigenetics, and it's the food, the movement, the environment, and the mindset. Focus there, and you will have a different outcome than your mother had with her menopause. We have the power to shift the expression of our genes through our epigenetic influences. This is where dietary and lifestyle modification come in, and it's going to be unique to each of us. If I go to the root of digestion, we can't talk about nutrition without talking about digestion, because you can be eating the quote unquote best diet ever, but if you can't utilize what you put in your body, like that car you mentioned, Zora, we are not getting what we need to be in our most vibrant state. And that root of inflammation is key. All chronic health conditions, and by that, I mean menopause, because it's not going away, we have to shift the terrain. And to do that, the soil is clear, calm, enhance, and modulate. And I like to invite women into that calm place, because that parasympathetic state, rest and digest, versus fight or flight, I need to find the answer, I need to get better, I need this to stop. When we come into the calm, we are actually able to shift what's happening in all of our body, inflammatory, but our hormones as well. And hormone issues are a branch, they are not a root.
So interesting. Yeah, because I tend to talk a lot about hormones and bioidenticals and hormone therapy. And I would say that it's can help a lot of women, and they do get a lot of relief. But I like to say that you can't out hormone a bad diet and lifestyle. So that's sort of the soil and the, getting to the roots as well. But I can't deny that there are women who really just are getting relief, but maybe other things will come up. I don't know in your experience, because you've been probably dealing with women going through menopause and getting that relief, and you understand what I'm talking about. But at the same time, what happens if they don't uh, till the soil and get the right nutrition? What are you saying?
Yeah, I think that's, like you said, where we're seeking something and we won't see the resolution. So, like you, I'm a proponent of bioidentical hormone therapy when appropriate. It doesn't work for everybody. And I think women think it's nowadays, think it's going to be a quick fix. If I go on those hormones, my belly fat will go away, my sleep will resolve. And like you said, it's a sometimes, but not an always. And I don't think there's enough people who know out there, medical professionals, who know how to dial it in just right for each woman. And I don't think they know how to tweak, and I don't think they know how to start low and go slow. So I myself, personally, at 57, I find that I actually feel better when I'm not on bioidenticals. I've tried different doses, I've tried different ways. Genetically, I need some hormone therapy. I need it for my bones. I need it for my heart. I need that estrogen. And we don't want to introduce estrogen without progesterone, because it's a balancing act between those sex hormones. So that means I have to really, really work with tiny doses, because I feel better off of it than on it. And I've been through the process that allows me, as somebody who's super tuned in, to pay attention and to not just go for the fix. I think a lot of medical providers are giving too much, too soon, and too many things at once. The DHEA, the estrogen, they're giving the whole kit and caboodle at doses where somebody can't even tell, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. They're also not appropriately testing and retesting and looking and tuning into both the quantitative data that comes from those tests and the qualitative data. How'd you feel? What are we experiencing? Do we need to stop and start again? I prefer one at a time, and start low and go slow, and build, 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 and recognize that it's a journey to finding your path with hormone therapy, and that there isn't one protocol that's going to work for all, or that's going to fix the signs and symptoms we're experiencing just like that.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that, yeah, we need to understand, or the doctor needs to understand now how to titrate and how to teach their clients our patients how to recognize certain symptoms, and that may mean too much estrogen or too little estrogen or too much progesterone, testosterone, all this stuff. And I'm doing this course, very interesting course right now with the Institute of Bioidentical Medicine, and it's a doctor's course or teaching doctors how to do this. And I'm so proud of them. I'm so happy that actually they're doing this, but I just think it's still a small percentage of people are going through these kind of courses, but they're doing the right thing. And then just to reiterate what you said is testing again,
Yes.
testing that also. So we have what we feel and our symptoms and the signs, and we also have the testing. I will reveal a lot too. So
Yeah, and to bring it back to that what broader terrain that you started out with in your question, like if we're looking at our genes, digestion, and inflammation, and we're tuned in, and I'm going to give us an easy way to do that with our non-negotiable trifecta: sleep, poop, blood sugar balance. Our sleep impacts our hormones. Our poop and our ability to detoxify impacts our hormones. Our blood sugar balance is what I would call the core of our sex hormone production. I think of it as a pyramid. So if we're dealing with sex hormone problems, how do we go down to blood sugar balance, insulin, cortisol, thyroid, sex hormones? Our sex hormones exist in the terrain of our inflammation. It's an entire ecosystem. And if we are managing our inflammation and tuned in, like you're talking about, we will influence the expression and the management, the ability to be more resilient with those hormone changes.
Thank you for summing that up. It's perfect. And when we say testing, it's not just testing your progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. We're talking about thyroid, testing your insulin, testing
Yes.
your HSCRP, your inflammation. And so a good functional medicine doctor who's trained in menopause should know these things. So just get it in your head. If you're listening now, when we say testing your hormones, it's there's a lot more than just the sex hormones, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about Hashimoto's, because you were diagnosed with this in your 30s and you're now in your 50s. So explain what is Hashimoto's, and then how does somebody know if you even have this condition and what it has to
Yeah.
do with menopause, if at
Yeah,
all,
yeah. I mean,
right?
because we talked about that hormone cascade, right? And you mentioned the thyroid hormones. So Hashimoto's is an autoimmune hypothyroidism. So that means the thyroid is underproducing the thyroid hormones. And that's because the immune system is attacking it. So I go back all the time: gene, digestion, inflammation. That's how I address any autoimmune condition. And as I mentioned earlier, autoimmune conditions are on the rise. They're the most prevalent of chronic illnesses, even more so than diabetes, cancer, and heart disease combined. There's over 100 kinds of autoimmune conditions. And again, it's where the immune system has decided, for some reason or another, to attack the tissues in a certain part of our body. So with Hashimoto's, it's the thyroid tissue. With Crohn's disease, it's going to be tissue within the digestive system. With MS, it's going to be tissues in the nervous system, right? So we start to see, for some reason, my body has auto attacked. And I like to think of the immune system as either being in its, ability to enhance and modulate appropriately, or it's overreactive to an external trigger, like we see in a lot of allergies, or overreactive to an internal trigger, like we see in autoimmunity. So it took me time to figure out what was going on with my body. And this is very true for all people with autoimmune conditions. It usually takes about 4 doctors, about 3 years, or flip that. Either way, it takes time of going, like you said, something's not right, what's going on, and our major medical system isn't trained to think through that lens or to look at what might be at play. So as an example, with the thyroid, in standards of care, they may just look at TSH as a measure on our serum labs. Our TSH is our thyroid stimulating hormone, and it's produced not in the thyroid, but in the brain. So it actually doesn't tell us the activity of the thyroid hormones. So we need a more comprehensive set of labs to be able to see how that thyroid hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, is propelling or putting on the gas or the brakes with the hormones that come from the thyroid. And there's two primary hormones. They're basically called T3 and T4. And like all hormones, we want to make sure that we're looking at the free hormone in our labs, like with our testosterone, like any hormone, so that we can see what's available to us in the bloodstream, because many of our hormones are bound and therefore the cell can't get to them. So what I'm saying here is that when we look at the thyroid, we want to look at the TSH, yes, but then we want to say, is it actually putting on the gas or the brakes for the thyroid, which is located in our neck region? That's why I keep pointing there, for the thyroid gland appropriately. And therefore, we look at the free T3 and free T4. We also want to look at the thyroid antibodies to determine, is there a problem there because of some attack on the thyroid tissue? So what I'm explaining here, if you can't follow, if the listeners can't follow what I'm saying, what I'm explaining here is a functional approach. All I'm saying is I need to look at the whole circuit as opposed to one marker to be able to understand, wait a minute, is this body functioning appropriately? I want to see the whole circuitry, not just one marker. And so Hashimoto's means I figured out with years of like trying to explore what's happening with my metabolism. Why am I gaining weight when my body, when my diet didn't change, my exercise didn't change? What's happening here? That it was related to my thyroid. Your thyroid is related to your metabolism. It's going to impact your elimination because it slows things down, your ability to metabolize, and therefore your weight, your heat and cold, and a number of other things in the body, because there's thyroid cell receptors throughout the entire system.
So what is the cause? Why are so many women getting these autoimmune diseases?
Yeah, again, this is where I come back to the three roots, because it's going to be different for each of us, but the clues lie within those three roots. So we know you have the genetic predisposition. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but you've got the genetic predisposition.
And which genes are those? Do you know?
It's not, we can't even look at it like that. I mean, what we've learned through the Human Genome Project is that we thought that there would be specific genes that would be related to certain health outcomes. There's very few that tell us that. And we can't know whether genes are turned on or off. So even if I have a gene, I have a COMT gene or an MTHFR, if that's common language to the audience, we don't know if it's turned on or off. I can measure and tell you if I have it or don't have it, but it doesn't mean it's turned on or off. So I can't think of my genes as something to treat. They're wallpaper. They're just information that help us understand possibility. And if we understand, as we do now in genomics, the polygenome, we know certain genes can't even be turned on at the same time. And yet there's few people looking at genes that understand that. And this is my issue with the quantitative information we get from a lot of genomic testing that makes people think, oh, I need to treat this genetic SNP or single nucleotide polymorphism that I have. Like, that's just not a way for us to be operating, because we do not know. So it's not a which gene as much as it is, I have the genetic predisposition. What do I know from my history? Does my mom, my grandma, my grandfather, did they have some propensity for this that I'm aware of? Or am I number one in the line? For me, that genetic propensity is very clear. My mom also has Hashimoto's. She had ulcerative colitis, and she has the gene for celiac disease. So I don't have to have those diagnoses to know, yep, I'm set up for this, right? So that's what I mean by genes. And again, our power and our empowerment comes back to our food, our movement, our environment, and our mindset. We're going to influence that expression. Digestion is really related to a number of factors. I call it mechanical, chemical, structural, and microbial. But that structural and microbial piece in our own digestive process is going to be a trigger for autoimmune expression. So let me just break this down. Is this of interest to break down? Okay.
Sure. Yes.
So when we have what's called gut hyperpermeability, or commonly known as leaky gut, this means our digestive system is letting things through into our bloodstream that shouldn't be there. So the gut has a certain amount of permeability. I'm putting my hands together and they're pressed like I'm in prayer. What happens when we have leaky gut or gut hyperpermeability is that lining gets a little looser. And that means there's the ability for molecules to get into the bloodstream that the immune system in the bloodstream doesn't recognize as supposed to be there, right? So it's not supposed to, when we get a molecule like a small molecule from our food, like an amino acid or a fatty acid or a glucose molecule, the bloodstream goes, hey, I see you. I'll take you to the cell for energy. But if something slightly larger comes through, like a peptide, which is a string of amino acids instead of one amino acid, so think about beads, and you've got 3 or 4 instead of 1, the immune system goes, what are you? What do I do with you? I need to mount an attack because I don't recognize you. Therefore, we start to train the immune system, which is a very trainable system in our body. This is called the adaptive immune system, to be on alert and on attack all the time because we're eating something that our body didn't break down appropriately. It then starts to get confused and mount attacks elsewhere with things that might look similar to that peptide, like tissues in our very own body. So this is one way I would help a person with an autoimmune condition to recognize where we do some healing of that digestive function to be able to calm the immune system down so that it's not on high alert.
Do you always have symptoms of that, or do some people feel nothing and they do have a leaky gut?
Correct. Yes. I would say that most people who are sick and not getting better, so chronic symptoms, have the opportunity to do some healing there that's going to help with inflammation, period. So it might not be felt as digestive. It never is for me. But that doesn't mean the puffiness in my eyes, or when I feel like there's a film around my body where there's like a thickness, that's inflammation, that isn't related to my opportunity to look and say, how can I shore up the connection between what's from the outside and what's on the inside? Because the digestive system is our biggest conduit from the external world to the internal world, meaning food to blood to cells.
So you were diagnosed with Hashimoto's in your 30s, and now in your 50s. How is there anything that's different between back then and now?
Yeah, it really is this understanding of where I can be empowered to support myself versus looking for the answer only on the outside. So I do take some thyroid hormone. I take some compounded thyroid hormone, and I had to really watch and know what the right dosing is for me. But I also was able to do all this other work to understand, wait a minute, what I can think about is that soil that changes how my body is responding to that propensity it has to attack this gland that produces the hormones that help with my energy and metabolism. So I'm constantly thinking that compounded hormone is only a piece of the puzzle. It's not the answer. And what I can do in my dietary and lifestyle behaviors is what's going to support any of the other changes I go through. And stress is a big trigger for our immune system and our hormones. And I have a lot of it in my life. I run a business that's always needing to scale, and a team, and it's a lot to deal with. And I have to do the other things to make sure that I'm supporting myself. I can't just get swept up in that stress alone.
Yeah, it does seem that stress has a lot to do with these autoimmune diseases. And when you think about going, by the time you're 50, you've been through a lot of trauma, and not just you've been particularly traumatized, but everyone has some kind of issue. By just, you don't get to your 50s, you imagine, don't get in your 90s without some bumps in the road. So it seems as that has a lot to do with it. And so we need to pay attention to our stress and manage that as well. Now, um, you mentioned that earlier that you did reduce your Hashimoto's symptoms by 95%. How exactly did you do this? Because you say it's, there's some nutrition and healing the gut and managing the stress. And is there any big ones that you think made a huge impact?
Yeah, yes. And it's going to be unique for all of us, right? But if I say, what are the non-negotiables? I always teach people that our non-negotiable trifecta is sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. So I'm constantly paying heed to those things. But non-negotiables are unique to each of us as well. So if I think about the term non-negotiable, and I just consider that for each of us, I can first say sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. So sleep, what do you notice? Sleep isn't a command. Like, I can tell people, like, sleep is going to be important. But if they're not falling asleep, if they're waking up in the middle of the night, people can be like, I'm trying to sleep. So what I like to do is break that down. What can we learn that's happening for you? We have a sleep assessment at the Functional Nutrition Alliance, and I'm thinking through, what time are you going to sleep? What's your sleep environment like? Are you waking up in the middle of the night? Like, what's happening with sleep? For me, a non-negotiable is going to sleep by 9:30, 10. If I push it beyond that, I'm going to have issues that cascade into other behaviors and physiological reactions that don't help me manage my Hashimoto's, right? Poop, so huge. As you know, Zora, with our hormones, we need to eliminate what we're not using. And sleep and poop are two of our biggest ways of detoxifying the hormones that we need to get rid of. And so we oftentimes go seeking, what do I need to do to help myself detox, or I need to do a cleanse. Sleep and poop are going to be first and foremost. So
Sound like babies.
we are basically babies.
Just to clarify too, because I'm sure some women are listening going, wait, why would we want to eliminate hormones? I'm putting them in. And I think you mean just the hormones that are the toxic versions are the ones that we want
Correct.
to take out, because not all
Correct.
hormones are, we love to talk about hormones and think they're so great, but they're also bad pathways that can go down, and we don't want those
Correct.
the toxic version, right?
Exactly. The ones that we've used and don't want to recycle. So once we've used something, we want to be able to eliminate it. And this is important to recognize, that the elimination of our estrogens that are toxic, as you're saying, that we've used and don't want to reuse or recirculate, all of that needs to happen through elimination. And again, I can't tell people to poop. I need to ask, what's happening with your poop? Do you notice anything with your poop? Does it change when you eat dairy, or when you don't eat breakfast, or when you eat caffeine, or when you don't sleep? So getting to that place that we were talking about earlier, where you're tuned in. If I say, listen to your body, that's a lot to listen to. If we just think about one area, let's just focus on sleep. What's happening? How do we bring some attention? Does anything change it? Does watching the news change your sleep? Does having a TV in your bedroom or having a fight with your sister, what do you notice impacts your sleep? That little bit of awareness helps us to take more charge instead of thinking the whole thing from that branch perspective. Listen to your body, fix your hormones. It's just too much to take on.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's all about dialing in though and trying to understand and learn about your body. And you mentioned sleep is so important to you. So non-negotiable is in bed by 9:30
For
ish,
myself.
right? For you. What does your sleep routine look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that I am more proficient and dialed in my morning routine than in my nighttime routine. However, I do like to use my nighttime space for relaxation. Make sure that I'm putting the day aside. I'm not doing any work in bed. I am using my bed to read, to relax, for pleasure with my partner, and only using it for that coming down time as opposed to being up and aware and alert and on guard. And so for me, that nighttime routine looks like all the things I do to clean up, come into my parasympathetic, and come into a rest and digest state.
Mm. Good tip. So, what about nutrition for a woman going through the menopause transition with or without Hashimoto's? Because I mean, if you have Hashimoto's, the diet probably looks a little bit different. But generally, what should we be looking out for and eating or not eating or timing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And when it comes to that soil, and I was talking about the genes as food, movement, environment, and mindset, the circle of influence, as I call it, around food is quality, quantity, diversity, and timing. And as a functional nutritionist, I do not subscribe to any one dietary theory. We could actually be doing harm to our bodies when we adopt a theory like intermittent fasting without understanding our physiology, or like a ketogenic diet. And this is a lot of what people strive for because they see or hear about results based on one dietary theory. Ditch the dietary theory. In fact, ditch the diet and tune in instead to what do those words mean for you? Quality, quantity, diversity, and timing. And so this is where I'm going to come back to the inflammation realm and say our goal is to be eating a diet that is as anti-inflammatory as possible. And this is where I'm going to talk to people about a few key principles around how we eat. And there are 3 principles I'm going to introduce, and we can talk into them. Principle number 1 is every meal should include fat, fiber, and protein. And this helps us with that blood sugar balance arena. People might be like, oh no, I need to wear a continuous glucose monitor. How do I know? Fat, fiber, protein, every meal is your goal for that piece. Principle number 2 is eat the rainbow. As many colors as we can eat from the earth, that's going to help us with that anti-inflammatory goal. It gives us a lot of phytonutrients that help us to fight inflammation. Principle number 3 is what I call a yes, no, maybe list. And this is where it comes to tuning into ourselves. So in functional medicine, we call this the realm of your mediators. And our mediators are what makes me feel better and what makes me feel worse. And so I can tell you that when I eat refined sugar, even if it's in something like a sauce, I'm going to get puffy. I don't want to be puffy. I don't want that to be how I'm showing up or slowing down or whatever it's doing inside my body. So for me, that's a risk reward situation where I can say refined sugar is on my no list, and I prefer to keep it on my no list, but that's my decision, risk reward. Do I want the risk of being puffy one day? It's my decision. I get to make that decision for myself, but I know that, right? If I eat, for me, again, gluten, I'm going to have digestive issues. I'm going to be more inflamed. I'm going to feel that thickness around my body. And I don't want to do that. That's a no food. I then know my maybe foods, like I don't eat dairy, but once in a while I eat goat or sheep dairy. And that's a maybe food for me. So knowing my yes, no, maybe list helps me make those decisions for myself on a daily basis. And some women might say, I don't know. Nothing, I don't know what makes me feel good or bad, but they feel bad all the time. And this is where tracking comes in, and we can say, do you notice if you have that glass of wine at night, you feel better or worse? Do you notice when you skip breakfast that you feel better or worse? And we have to slow down and tune in. And this is called interoception. How do I look internally and take the clues that my body is telling me to learn about that area? Yes, no, maybe. If I don't know them, but people often know something. Like when I eat X, I get diarrhea or whatever it is. They know a little bit of something. That's a great place to start.
The world is not made for people to who don't eat gluten and dairy and sugar. It's really hard if you eat out, right?
Yes.
I'm a nomad, so you know me, I travel all over the world, and I was just as I walk through airports and go to restaurants, and it's not every time I have a kitchen. I just think it's like foraging, and I manage, and it's fine. But I can look at a menu very quickly and decide very quickly what I want because it's pretty much one or two options for me. But most people are not like that. And it's not, and it's unfortunate because, you know, it'd be nice to be like in a blue zone where life is gently nudging you towards healthy choices because there's nothing else, right? Like that's the way it is. And, and then it's one of those things. So what would you tell a woman who is going through who eats out a lot, for example, in
Yeah.
Hong Kong, where I was health coaching a lot? Like, no
Yeah.
one eats at home, no one
Right.
cooks. They were amazed that I knew how to cook. So you know, and some women just don't have the luxury as well, or don't like. What would you say to her and how to navigate the world with saying I can't, I'm not gonna, these are my no foods, and how does she stick with it? I mean, you understand
Yeah.
what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, I totally do. And I just want to say, like, it's much easier than it used to be. Like, I've been on this journey for a long time and it's so much easier. And I love Hong Kong. So I'm so glad you spend so much time there. It has a deep place in my heart. I've spent a lot of time there as well. And so, what I would say is remember, this is a risk and a reward situation, and you get to decide. I want to empower everybody that you don't need to live your life like you're on a diet. There's a lot of pushback to dietary theories, to this idea that we have to eat a certain way. I see a lot of women who have worked with a lot of functional practitioners, and now they're like, forget it. I had to track, I had to do all these food eliminations, and that really didn't serve me mentally. So I want to say, where do you start? And it might be with the foods you include instead of the foods you exclude. So if you're eating out a lot, can you choose by color instead of by worry? Right? So, oh my gosh, does it have gluten or dairy? If you're not there yet, don't do it. If you're there, like me, that's a non-negotiable. It's just something that I'm like, okay, if it has butter, it's okay. But if it has gluten, it's not. I know my ability, but everybody's at a different place on this journey. So start with what you know you can do instead of putting yourself in this realm of restriction that we all want to buck up against. We all want to say, unless we're complete rule followers, like, I'm not supposed to, but I'm gonna, right? So ditch that way of thinking and instead thinking about, what do I want to include more of? Is there something on this menu that has more color, more green, more yellow, more red that I can include where I know I'm getting something good for me, but I'm not really paying attention to the other things right now? So it's a matter of recognizing where you are on your journey and embrace wherever that is, because otherwise you're in an emotional disconnect with what you're putting into your body.
Mm. So, what about the woman who's going through menopause who tends to become insulin resistant? It's not uncommon. What kind of advice would you give to her? And are you seeing women insulin resistant really in your practice?
Yeah, 1,000%. And this is where, again, I want to come back to the fat, fiber, protein. And that fiber relates to all those colors. We're going to get a lot of fiber when we eat more of those colors. And so we want to be thinking about how do we work to manage that. And it's a reduction of the foods that are high glycemic. That means that they're feeding the blood sugar, and an anchoring on the fat, fiber, and protein. That's where we're going to be able to do the work to be able to manage that response. And then there may be things that are necessary for that woman in the realm of supplementation. So when I talked about the non-negotiables, that's part for me of another system of thinking. I call it the 3 tiers to nutrition mastery. Number 1 are the non-negotiables. Number 2 is deficiency to sufficiency. So we may have deficiency. We may have a deficiency in a vitamin, like a vitamin D. We may have a deficiency in insulin or insulin receptivity. We may have a deficiency in estrogen. Those are the things we can be looking at, but we also want to look at, do I have a deficiency in fiber? Do I have a deficiency in hydrochloric acid, which helps me to break down my proteins? Do I have a deficiency in sleep? Do I have a deficiency in joy or laughter or pleasure? And so it's just broadening our way in to the health of our cells. We think about the health of our cells as something that's broken and needs to be fixed, but it's part of a larger ecosystem. We are not just our cells. We are not just our hormones. We are not just our organs. We are an entire ecosystem that's constantly shifting and changing. And so I invite women into a broader perspective, but the way in is that fat, fiber, protein, and the reduction of those foods that quickly feed that blood sugar response.
Let's give a woman an example. What? Because I say the same mantra: protein, fats, and fiber, the rainbow. My breakfast, for example, looks like I eat vegetables for breakfast. It's usually a
Yeah.
stir fry with
Mm-hmm.
mushrooms and ginger and garlic, and then I put some color of tomatoes or carrots in there. And then I get a bit of protein from maybe eggs or some chicken from last night, but it's not exactly the diet that maybe we see a lot in the West. What does your breakfast look like? And what can, or, what else can we give a woman if they don't want to have this vegetable stir fry for the breakfast?
Yeah, I'm going to give a progression, and I'm going to use my boyfriend's breakfast as an example because I eat similar to how you eat, Sora. So just as an alternate, I'll give him as an example. He's very fit. He's in his mid 50s, works out really hard, but his labs show that he has some blood sugar issues. When I met him over 6 years ago, he was eating oatmeal with skim milk and brown sugar. So
Mm.
those are all carbohydrates. And when we think about a skim milk, which we might think of as better because it has less fat, it actually has higher sugar because we took the fat out. It's also a refined food because we removed something that's part of the whole food. So the quick shift there was that when he was asking me, and I don't want to take him on as my client, he's my boyfriend, but he said, what can I do? We changed it to oatmeal that we doctored up with some collagen peptides. He used raw honey, which is supportive of the gut microbiome and lower glycemic because it's not processed, and almond milk. So that's what he switched to at first. He then continued to see that there was more he could do to shift his blood sugar. So we went from oatmeal to a no oatmeal, no dash oatmeal. So every morning he eats a mixture of chia and hemp seed that he soaks in almond milk. He still uses his raw honey in the morning because he likes the sweetness. He puts some sprouted walnuts in there and blueberries. So he takes every night the chia, the hemp, the walnuts, soaks that with the almond milk. I believe he also puts his collagen and some cinnamon in there. So we've just gotten a lot of functional foods in there. In the morning, he adds his raw honey and his blueberries. We've just gone from something that's higher glycemic to mid-glycemic to low glycemic, meaning those breakfast options are going to have a different impact on his blood sugars, but it still to him has the enjoyment that he would have from his oatmeal. So is that a good example of taking us to fat, fiber, protein from total carbohydrate?
Yes, and I wish they would serve that in a restaurant. That's the trouble. Like once you get there, you're like, I can only eat at home. But yeah, so just to clarify, some people who are listening too, you've got the fats that are coming from the seeds and the nuts. You've got the fiber coming from also the same thing, the seeds
Yep.
and the nuts and the
Yep. And the
blueberries.
blueberries. Yep.
Right. And you have your carbohydrates, that's also there with the sugar, the honey, and then the collagen would be the protein. Is that
As
correct?
well as the seeds and the
And
nuts.
this, but
Those
would that be
also, right?
enough for a man who trains hard, or is that just his
So
snack?
he's not training, that's his breakfast, but he might have oatmeal before he works out in the
Hmm.
late afternoon. So he might need more sugars. I have a whole article on the Functional Nutrition Alliance site about how my boyfriend eats marshmallows because he was a climber. And when he's working out hard, he needs fast sugar. He has a high metabolism. I could never eat a marshmallow. And I don't need that to fuel my workout, but he does for his body type. And this speaks into our bio-individuality. But yes, the fat, fiber, the protein comes from those different sources. So he's getting more of that balance into his diet. And I just want to say to the travel part, when we travel, whether it's to Iceland or to the coast or wherever we're going, he takes little baggies that he wraps up with those measurements in them, and he'll just get water or a milk that is acceptable for where he is, and he doesn't travel without that. So everything is in those little baggies he creates, and there are packets like that if people don't want to make their own. There's so many brands these days that have like no oatmeal packets. There's Wild Way, and there's just a bunch of brands that now have these cereals that are no carb and
Mm.
higher fat, fiber, protein content.
In the US.
In the
It's so hard
US,
to
true.
find
True,
everywhere
true, true,
else.
true. True,
But
true. But we've traveled out of the country and he's found chia or hemp, or
oh
he's
yeah.
found some version that he could then make his little no oatmeal. It depends where you are, of course, but like we've been in Europe, we've been in Iceland, we've been in Asia, and he's able to find some of these things that he can then create or recreate.
Yeah, no, you can create it. Just those little packets already made. It's a bit harder, but it's so
Right.
convenient. It's something that
Totally.
hopefully we'll get more of around the world. But he's so well trained. I mean, it must be important to him because my husband would never do that. He was like, as much as I practically would do it for him, doesn't even want me to do it for him. He just doesn't want to do that.
Well, I think this is, it speaks to bio-individuality because when I met him, he only ate oatmeal, rice, and chicken because he had a lot of digestive issues. So he was incentivized by his digestive issues and by then what the labs were telling him. He would, when we first started dating, I would eat like a bowl of broccoli. And he was like, if I could eat that, you'd be the queen. And so I was like, okay, let's address your digestion. And I did that through what I call magic sprinkles. Like I just had him add things to a morning smoothie or to his oatmeal at the time. Now he can eat anything. And to your point, Zora, there's things he's eating I'd rather him not eat, but that's his decision, his body, his understanding what works and what doesn't. And he's motivated. He is motivated by his health and how he feels in his physical body. And so that's his journey. And, if he's eating pizza every Friday with his kids, good for him. Not my
Yeah.
choice, but that's his journey.
Yeah, I think the motivation comes, yeah, when you huge massively when you actually feel something or notice a difference, whether it's good or bad. So
Exactly.
that's huge. So I do have to let you go because we're wrapping up now, but I'd love to tell people about the Alliance or any events that you have coming up, or do you have any programs that they can jump into?
Yeah, and I'll just lead people towards AndreaNakayama.com. That leads people back to the Functional Nutrition Alliance. I do train practitioners, and we have a clinic there as well. So anything you want to explore at the Functional Nutrition Alliance is open to folks. The training program is for coaches and clinicians looking to help people through these methodologies, but the training is, offered several times a year. So there's always an opportunity to jump in over there. And my writing and my newsletter over at AndreaNakayama.com are always growing and changing. Thank you for asking.
Great. I'll have links to that in the show notes, as well as you have a Substack. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so I just recently moved off the Substack. Substack is a place to have a blog outside of a website, but I launched the Andrea Nakayama website just recently. So that's all available. All my writing is over there under articles. This podcast will be posted over there. Everything's at AndreaNakayama.com. And then I also have a blog at Functional Nutrition Alliance. It's just audience based. So I'm always speaking more to the patient audience at AndreaNakayama.com and to the practitioner audience over at Functional Nutrition Alliance, where we train other coaches and clinicians.
Perfect. So I'll have links to all of that as well as your Instagram and your Facebook too, so people can get more information and reach out to you. And before I let you go, do you have any last words for a woman going through the menopause transition?
Yeah, I'm going to really invite women to focus on that area that I called our non-negotiables, and beyond sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. Just know what is true for you. What makes you or helps you to feel your most vibrant self. It may be walking with a girlfriend, or knowing that you're doing a morning stretch, or getting into bed with a book every night. Like, really invite some of those things that nourish you at the core back into your life, because we often lose those things along the way when we get busy with family and all the things. Invite them back. Think back. When did I feel best in my life? And is there a thread I can bring forward into my life today?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And I hope to have you on again. And I do have a couple more questions for you, but we'll have to do it another time. And have a wonderful day, a good
You
night,
too.
good morning, anyone else who's listening. And we'll see you next time.